Rachel, could you tell us a bit about Practical Action and what type of organisation you are?
Yes, we're a development NGO and our slogan is Technology Challenging Poverty. So what we work to do is to make technologies, by which we mean skills, knowledge, information, as well as the hard gear, if you like, the widgets, accessible to people to meet the challenges that they face in their daily lives to enable them to work themselves out of poverty.
And I suppose there are two things there. The first is, how do you make that information accessible?
Well, we work at the community level. We start from where people are at in their lives. So what do you do in your lives that works? What are the challenges that you feel you're facing? So in the programme that I work, which is mainly on rural livelihoods, it's been the challenges of weather. We work with people who already live in difficult environments. So when I started working there, we were hearing from the communities about more droughts, weather not so predictable, and how could they still produce food or more food because population was growing and so on. So we start with the knowledge that people have, we value that, and then try to meet the challenges, which may be very concrete ones. We don't have enough water or our soil is fairly infertile, and then work with them, perhaps drawing on knowledge of what they used to do to tackle this problem, and then maybe their situation has changed and they can't do the same thing. So then we work with them to develop approaches that have probably been tried elsewhere, not magic bullets, but maybe their community didn't know about them, or maybe it's been tried in a similar environment, similar ecological environment, but in another country, but it could be appropriate. So it's like a kind of working with people in a participatory way to develop a technology. Mm-hmm. So, for example, sort of rainwater harvesting, where you capture water as the rain comes, before it runs right across the field, washing all the soil. You slow it down with bunds and mounds and so on, let it percolate through the soil, and then it's there available for the crop.
And why are soils so degraded? Is it a case of climate change, or is it a case, as I think you're suggesting, a sense of a lack of education on the part of farmers in rural communities?
There are multiple stresses, so it's not a simple answer. But one of the problems has been really, I suppose, stemming from population growth, plus going back to the colonial era, where the best land where people farm was appropriated by colonising countries, and ordinary people were pushed into the more marginal areas where soils are poorer, and yet the only techniques they had was for how to work on the better land. That's in some cases. In Peru we work with mountain communities where soil has always been poor and they've always struggled and they've managed to survive, but now they're facing situations where the weather is definitely harsher and they haven't got the skills or enough resilience, enough spare resources to cope with weather-related disasters and then recover. So if your animals die during an extremely harsh frost, then you haven't got anything left to build up the herd. So we're working with them to improve animal health and resilience.
And if you take a country like Nepal, where there's been a lot of deforestation,
yes,
and when you fly on your way to, when I went to the Everest Base Camp recently, you fly over the Himalaya and you can see that most of the forests have gone, and there now are a series of terraces where they grow their vegetables and rice. But obviously the counterproductive element of that is when it rains, there's no tree roots to hold the soil in place. How can you work with communities like that? Because they need those crops to survive.
Yes, I think where there is terracing, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because if land is terraced, then you can retain the water, and particularly if you plant up the edge of the terrace, then those roots at the edge of the terrace, and it might be a grass crop or a shrub crop, it needn't be trees, will retain the soil, and then yes, people can cultivate. The problem arises more where you've got, they let their animals graze the forest, they eat all the young shoots, they've cut down the trees for fuel wood or construction, and then the soil disappears, and when the rains come and washes houses away and you get tragedies. So yeah, it's a matter of enabling people to understand and then giving them the skills to build terraces and to grow crops that will be more productive so that they don't need so much land. And also there we've tried to develop a kind of zero grazing for goats. So people go into the forest and cut down leaves from the trees So then at least the young seedlings have got a chance of growing up, and the goats aren't trampling the soil and denaturing it. So bringing the leaves back and keeping the goats round the homestead.
And finally, we often think about adaptation, and a lot of the measures discussed at these big COP events as being quite expensive. It sounds to me like practical action. You have some fairly cost-effective ideas. What sort of costs are we looking at, and do you think that in the long run, improving agricultural education needs to be an expensive measure?
I don't think it need. I mean, it's hard to work out the cost, but a project that I ran some years ago, we were talking about something like $80 per household to give people the training and perhaps some initial seeds, enabling them to start up. Now, that isn't going to be the total solution, but that definitely was strengthening their livelihoods. So we are urging in these negotiations that adaptation finance, yes, you may need some of it for strengthening bridges and roads and so on, but a lot of it should go on the small-scale technologies that are useful to the people most affected by climate change.